Hi, this is Carrie Brownstein.
This is DJ Premier.
This is Darren Aronofsky.
You got the RZA right here.
Rose McGowan.
Radiohead.
Aisha Tyler.
Tribe Called Quest.
Fred Armisen.
Prince Paul.
Javier Munoz. Seth Meyers.
Frankie Cosmos.
Flying Lotus.
Hi, we're Chaim, and you're listening to the Talkhouse podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Talkhouse podcast. I'm Josh Modell. So picture this, it's 1994. The Pixies had been music world darlings for half a decade or so, releasing some incredible records before fizzling to a breakup. Their enigmatic singer, Black Francis, changes his name to Frank Black and embarks on a solo career that feels a little vexing at the time. Now, his self-titled debut felt deeply connected to his old band, but for his next one, he found an even richer and much different kind of songwriting vein. The songs kept coming, and they turned into the double album Teenager of the Year, recorded with a crack studio band that included Eric Drew Feldman of Pere, both as a player and producer. Now, Teenager of the Year wasn't particularly well received upon its release 30 years ago, but it has slowly been recognized as a high point in Black's career, celebrated as his masterpiece by those paying the closest attention. It may not get the widespread attention that Pixies Doolittle does, but the love it does get might even run deeper, both from its creator and its biggest fans. It's meaningful enough that Black and the original band that created the record have just embarked on an anniversary tour, during which they'll play the whole record, and it's being re-released on gold vinyl, a gold record that should have been. You can find dates online. They'll be hitting major U.S. cities throughout January, ending in New York February 1st, before heading to Paris and London, where they can really appreciate a record like that one. Now, as a high school student, Paul Banks came to the Pixies via a love of Nirvana, and eventually found his way to Teenager of the Year, an album that, as you'll hear in this conversation, was massively important to him. Banks would, of course, go on to form the band Interpol, for which he has been the singer and guitarist since 1997. Their latest is 2022's The Other Side of Make Believe, but Interpol has also been revisiting a beloved album recently, touring on the anniversary of their classic second record, Antics. Now, these two have a great chat about Teenager of the Year here, plus they talk about Black's kids and their musical ambitions, lyric writing in general, and the time Black was asked to audition for the part of a serial killer in a David Fincher movie. They also get into some specifics about Teenager of the Year songs, including a great story about album opener, Whatever Happened to Pong. Check out a little bit of that itty-bitty song here, and then enjoy the conversation.
Are you in Berlin?
I'm in Berlin, yeah. My wife is German, Scottish, and we're living together in Scotland during the pandemic and then decided to move here so she could look for a job. Edinburgh wasn't really popping for the fashion world, so we moved to Berlin, which is closer to where she was brought up as well. Did you say you've never been here? You've never lived here?
I've been there many times, but yeah, I've never lived there. And I'm envious as well of your moving around lifestyle. I like that. I mostly get to do it through the touring, but if I had my druthers, I used to always want to live. Nothing against any of the fine locations in Europe, but I said, okay, if I have to choose one, somewhere in France. I tended to kind of like, and I'm not a Francophile. I speak really shitty French, but I felt comfortable there. I liked it or whatever. I liked the vibe, you know?
Yeah.
So I thought maybe I would one day, and now it's like at this point, it's like it sort of almost looks like, yeah, for when I retire or whatever, that's going to be my big fucking move. And I like Germany a lot.
Yeah.
It's a very amusing place. I love it there.
You're in the States?
In Massachusetts, yeah.
Since forever, or how long have you been there?
About a dozen years. I lived in Oregon for a while, and I started a family there. They're all here now for the most part. And I've spent a lot of time in LA. But my kids are all, I got a couple still living here, but, you know, they're old. The youngest is 16, and he's kind of more independent than all of them. And as everyone else has moved on, they're living elsewhere or they're about to live elsewhere or whatever. And as a advanced middle-aged person, my scene is like shifting in terms of like parental kind of duty, as it were. It's getting a little looser.
Did your kids get the art bug in any way? I don't know how much you want to go into, you know, the kids, but I'm curious. I have a son who's almost 2, and I feel like I'll leave it up to him what directions he goes, obviously, but curious if he, is a musical chap. I'm also curious, like, to what extent does being an artist have to do with your upbringing or something in youth? And like, am I creating an environment that would, not be conducive to, being an artist?
Yeah. I've never discouraged the lifestyle. As they've grown older, maybe I've pointed out certain pitfalls, but I've never discouraged it. They haven't all taken to it, but two of them are very interested in it, and the youngest one, he's got more of the rock and roll thing going, I guess, kind of post punk thing. He plays guitar and he plays the drums, and he's got bands and stuff, and
Cool.
so he's got some notions. And then he's got an older brother who's, I can hear him pounding away downstairs. He plays everything too, but he's more of like instrumental and light jazz and Bruce Hornsby and shit like that. Like
Wow.
he does not give two shits about the punk rock. Does not give two shits about it. And but he's really good at like all of that stuff, that world of kind of middle of the road kind of piano playing man, kind of just real fancy kind of. He's a good player. He can emulate any kind of style. I've used him on a couple of sessions, and I remember I told him to just listen to what's his name, Floyd Kramer. So I said, Jack, the song's kind of like a country rock thing. I said, this old guy that all the alternative people love, guy called Floyd Kramer. His heydays with the 50s and the 60s, and he's on every big record, for a long time. Anyway, so next morning for the session, kid's making himself a cup of coffee, listening to Floyd Kramer, down the studio, he shows up, bam, thank you, instant Floyd Kramer. I think he would be very comfortable in Nashville. So I've been trying to encourage him to go that way. I feel like there are a lot of people that might speak his language that way. And the other one, he's younger anyway. He's got a girlfriend and a lot of jewelry and stuff, and a lot of clothing, a lot of guitars. He's got a lot. I do have to buy more guitars down there, because all like whatever is like the better shit in the house, they figure it out.
Right. Yeah.
And then now that shit disappears, and it's like, oh fuck, only the broken guitars here now. So I've actually started to have to buy more guitars again, because all of the good ones, they're like in a locker somewhere. They're on the slow boat to the UK or somewhere, wherever the next tour starts. That's where the good shit is. But then all the B-list stuff, they ended up getting most of it. And so now I went to Norm's Rare Guitars the other day in Los Angeles, and I allowed myself a couple of purchases. They weren't too extravagant.
I mean, there's always room for more guitars. I just unpacked an old Flying V that I bought for the aesthetic of it years ago, but then I just discovered that it has a really amazing tone and is really great for sort of up the neck. I mean, I guess it's obvious it's good for lead stuff, but it's really, really cutting and really warm and direct in a way that I didn't recall it being such a nice guitar. But I want to say, like, I feel like we could do an 8 or 9 hour podcast, or we could do like 1 hour weekly, because I just have a sense that I could talk to you for a long time. But I want to make sure we cover at least, in part, the topic of the day, which I think is Teenager of the Year, 30th anniversary.
Certainly, I am a master of non-focus. So please, it would be great for you to bring some focus to our discussion.
Okay. Well, but I mean, I super enjoy it.
So Teenager of the Year.
Yeah. And I wanted to give you some context about what your work means to me, if that's all right, just briefly.
Yeah, sure.
And probably it's uncomfortable to hear people gush too much. So, I mean, there couldn't be a higher level of gushery than what I, could issue forth. I'll spare you that. But your work has been a huge influence for me and a really massive inspiration since I was in high school and first heard Pixies, and Teenager of the Year was my senior year in high school, and I just devoured it. I had a small peer group that had some great taste in music, and there was that record. And then The Fallen Cult of Ray is an all-time classic favorite for me. I went to see you with the Catholics in Bowery Ballroom in the early 2000s, and I think in Tramps in the West Village on another occasion.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
So, yeah, I could go in on all of your work as just being super important to me. I put you on a very, very short list of artists, and I'll just say it, but I put you kind of with Bowie, because I thought about this. The only people that I can think of that I can share a small circle with what I think your art does and accomplishes for me is Bowie, Robert Smith. Who was the other one? Prince. Anyway, it's super short list that does what I think you do, which is this classic songwriting, very, very high level lyrics. And then finally, this thing that I think is very rare, which is atmospheres. And I think that your music creates this sort of like cinema of its own that surrounds you. Just kind of, it's like moods that really transcend. It's not just like, oh, this is rocking or this is fun or this has got like good, pacing or great song structure. It's actually like I feel transported. There's something almost like transcendent about some of the places that the music goes. So anyway, I could do a whole podcast just talking about how big of a fan I am, but I really just wanted you to know that I celebrate your work and really appreciate that you have put so much art into the world. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you very much. Well, that's some pretty lofty company there. You are in a band and you make records yourself, and so I know that you understand that there's a lot of freedom potentially in making music. There's a whole range of things that can happen on the way to the final experience or product or whatever. There's a whole range of experiences that people can have depending on how they're participating in, in this case, the making of a record. I found it to be very true among artists, and I guess to a similar degree, maybe even some of the other people, even the technical kind of people that you meet in that world. Everybody is kind of a little bit obsessive about records and bands and stuff like that. Everyone, at least with my crew, it's like if I step into the crew bus at midnight after a show on the bus, what is going on there? They're probably having a drink or whatever, or a smoke, and they're listening. And usually what they do, they're listening to music, right? They're listening to their favorite records, and maybe even someone's got control of the whatever the player is, their iPhone or whatever, and so someone is quote unquote DJing the evening, right?
Yeah, aux cable.
There's a kind of, oh, here we go, so-and-so, oh, here we go, it's going to be progressive rock tonight. There's a kind of camaraderie that people bring to certain artists, of course, and then certain records, sometimes their favorite records, So anyway, I think that the Teenager of the Year experience for me, let's see, I had made about 5 records with the Pixies, and I had done one other solo record. So I was starting to feel, dare I say, seasoned at that point. You know what I mean? Because whatever, it was like my 6th recording project or whatever that I had been involved in. But I was still very, I wasn't like I was an old dude, right? I was still, in my 20s or whatever.
You were young, yeah.
I was youngish. I've made a lot of records since then. I started to feel kind of relaxed. I was pretty relaxed before, but now it's like I didn't even have a band and I didn't even have a career necessarily. Fortunately for me, I've never been locked into anything really negative in terms of the business side of things. So as long as you can keep doing the thing that you want to do, which is hang out around a recording studio with your friends, make a bunch of music, right? And then maybe, if we're lucky, we get our shit together, go on the road and play some shows, right? And who knows? Maybe we'll even sell a few shirts and we'll make some money or whatever.
I was going to ask if you had songs written when you went into the studio, or did you kind of do it, as you say, just with friends in the studio? Like, did you generate all the material from the ground up with Lyle Workman and the other guys on that record?
Only in a very cursory kind of way. Like we had a rehearsal space that we rented for a week or two, and we kind of ran over a few things there. But mostly it was just sort of like I would wake up a little too early in the morning, right? Have my coffee, compose my ditty, show up at the studio or the rehearsal space and be like, yep, I got a new one. Here we go.
Could you write a whole song in a day? Could you just generate chords and lyrics?
Not lyrics. See, that's the thing. That's my big downfall is I like to go through this very dramatic kind of, writer's block moment. every record. It's kind of like, it's just like, because it's like fucking homework. It's like the algebra part of the whole thing. It's like, I like doing it once I get going, but until I get going, it's just like a fucking chore. And it just seems like I'm not going to do a good job.
Do you sing top line while you play the guitar, but just like make up fake words until you find the lyrics? Or do you write the top line when you write the lyrics?
Sometimes I'll have a top line, but more often than not, I'm distracted by coming up with more chordal pieces, more musical passages, kind of moods, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes even a vocal attitude, about like what the song is going to kind of be, you know what I mean? The kind of character that inhabits the song and probably is at the vocal mic.
So I don't want to cut you off, but I do want to.
No, you're not. Always cut me off, please. Always cut me off.
I actually had made some notes about some things I wanted to ask you. One of them was, had you ever done any acting, or did you want to? Because of, as you say, like you just brought up kind of the character of the song. And I feel like you really sink your teeth into a persona with each song. And you have these ways of approaching the mic and the ways of using your voice, whether it's like yelly or snarky. And I just feel like it's very actorly.
I have no experience in any kind of acting other than I guess I bore a certain resemblance to the Zodiac serial killer, and
Suspect.
What's his name? The guy that did Fight Club and other films.
Fincher.
Thank you. He sent me a script and he said, would you read for the part of the Zodiac Killer? And he sent me some pretty heavy shit in the mail, And but I kind of got into it for like 5 minutes, and I said, look, I'm not an actor. He said, this is an audition. I get it. Just come and read. Come down to my producer's office. We just want you to read the script. We just want to see what you sound like when you're talking, kind of, So, but I tried. I went to an acting coach for one night. I explained the situation that I was in, and I tried to get into what I was doing. The gentleman, I call him a gentleman, he's a serial killer. The person in question is ex-military in the Air Force. So I went to the Army Navy store down there in Hollywood, and I picked up a pair of Air Force boots. So I was kind of like wearing these uncomfortable Air Force boots before I had to go do this reading, and then I did the reading. And long story short, I sucked really bad. I could barely function, like I couldn't follow the punctuation of what I was reading, and my voice was shaky, and I was so nervous at the whole context of it being like somehow connected to a movie or something, even though it wasn't an actual audition. And they were like, hey, it's okay. I was literally like a sitcom, you know what I mean? Like a total fucking, oh, this is where he blows it, and he totally blows it. And so I'm not an acting person.
That's interesting.
But certainly the idea of the characters, I probably first picked up on characters, music, probably listening, I would guess, probably mostly to Beatles and Bob Dylan records, probably. When you hear the Beatles and you like the Beatles as a kid and you get enthusiastic about them and you start to listen to all the different records from the different parts of their career and everything, and you try to absorb the whole thing, it gives you license to do a lot of shit. You know what I mean? It's like, well, I'm not saying I'm going to do good or anything like that, but, whatever, my inner child is like, well, the Beatles did that. They did a character that was like that, or they attempted to do a sound that was like that. They attempted to have a certain kind of minimalism, or a certain kind of sense of humor, or a certain type of complexity, or whatever it was they were pursuing at the moment. So from a very young age, I've always had the license to do whatever the fuck I want, and I didn't have to push back on anyone. And I got involved with this 4AD records in England there, but I've always presumed I get to do what I want. And then when I actually got involved with a record company, they were like, yeah, do what you want.
I think that's, if you have that kind of creative presence that I think you do, I think people just intuitively sense that like this person doesn't need guidance. They just need to be left, alone and maybe given some money. So good on them for recognizing that.
Yeah, I've never really felt limited by the man or anything. I've never, no one has really given me a hard time about anything. I haven't always made money. You know what I mean? I've broken even plenty of times, but I've been allowed to stay in the so-called game, and certainly like the Teenage of the Year thing represents this season where I was like, I get to do whatever the hell I want. I get to sound like whatever I want. I get to hang out with whoever I want. And we weren't blowing the money on drugs or anything like that. We were totally just working, you know what I mean? Just like overworking, hiring, going to more studios, learning about more recording techniques.
Oh yeah,
It's so much fun.
I did the LA studio circuit with RZA when RZA and I. Do you know Wu-Tang Clan and RZA? I don't know if you're a hip hop fan.
I don't know their records, but I know who you speak. Yes,
we made a record and it had a pretty big budget and just did sessions in every studio around LA, and it's just like money fucking out the fucking door. Very expensive process, but really worthwhile, and I did enjoy it a lot. I wanted to ask you about lyrics on the record because it's surprising to hear you say that it's so much like algebra. For me, I know it is agonizing for me. That's like the last hardest step of making a song, but they seem so good on everything that you do. And I was listening carefully to Teenager, and just like every phrase there's no duds. It's all very, very creative and all very inspired.
Well, you mentioned the hip hop. They have a certain kind of energy that when they put down their best raps or whatever, there's a certain kind of energy that they're tapping into. It's a confident place, right? It's a confident place, and it's flowing, right?
It's interesting to hear you say that that's a difficult part of the process for you, but I do identify it. And for me, it's like the hardest part of it's like the first 98% of writing a song fairly doable, and then that last 2% is just fucking brutal. But I thought you really nailed it in all of your work. I think your lyrics are great.
I try. I don't know if they're all great, but I definitely have like a lot of fun when I'm doing it. I do run into my own lyrics sometimes, and I'm a little bit like, really? That's what you came up with, But for the most part, I'm pretty happy with it, and it does flow. Like once you get past the certain point and you start to do the libretto part of it, I do feel excited, and I do feel happy, and I do work on it. It doesn't become a chore anymore. It's a kind of energy. It's like, oh, I got this now. You know what I mean? It's like, you want lyrics? Yeah, I can write lyrics. I'll write you as many lyrics as you want.
Could I ask you about Big Red?
Yeah, sure.
Here's my fan theory. Big Red is the narrator is either on Mars after having been part of a population of, populate terraforming of Mars process, or they're in the spaceship halfway between Mars and Earth, having been to Mars or on their way to Mars. What do you say to that?
I just performed the song the other night for the first time in many years, but I think the character ultimately has not been there yet.
Okay.
But in the verses, it's talking more from an omniscient point of view, like, hey, have you heard about this? And have you heard about that? And have you heard about old 15 miles on the Erie Canal happening? That's the sort of business speak, the rumor mill, the kind of the gold rush. Have you heard? Have you heard? And then the chorus is the sentiment of like, sort of like, now I'm saying goodbye. I'm going off in my little bucket in the sky, and I'm saying goodbye to you because I'm going there and you're staying here, and it's a long, long way between the two places.
It is Mars, though.
Sure, yeah. I guess
okay, good.
So some of the sort of Martian references would have been influenced by this guy, Kim Stanley Robinson. He writes these books. A lot of them are about Mars, but he writes about California too. He wrote this great science fiction trilogy called The Three Californias. And it's not quite as sort of like edgy as like, say, Philip K. Dick or something like that, but it's it definitely is not trying to be fantastical in its sort of in the fiction aspect of it. The fiction aspect of it is fairly believable, not technologically so far removed from where we are, but tries to be in a believable world. It's not little green people or whatever. It's more about I don't know, corporate greed and stuff like that.
Right.
These kinds of very earthly concepts.
I remember thinking, like musing as a child about this idea that aliens would be this sort of recognizable, be it like the Greys or like little green men. And I remember kind of thinking like, well, our senses are kind of evolved to help us navigate this environment. But if we're talking about a completely different environment, then the things that would develop in those other environments maybe would not even be recognizable to our eyes. Have you seen the film Annihilation?
I don't think so.
It's a Natalie Portman and Oscar Isaac, and it's a super fucked up movie. It's based on the story The Color Out of Space, which is Lovecraft.
Oh yeah.
And there's a Nicolas Cage film around the same time called The Color Out of Space, which is even more fucked up than Annihilation, based off of the same story. It's just like something lands in an area, and then everything around where this little like sort of meteor, I think, lands, it becomes other.
Yes. I believe that the origin of the story is Russian. It's by these two brothers that wrote a number of science fiction novels. One of their books that they did is called Roadside Picnic. And in Roadside Picnic, this is exactly what happens is other intelligence lands on Earth in a couple of different places and then takes off. No one really ever understood what went on, but basically those zones where the landings occurred kind of become no-go zones because all kinds of, they left behind the sort of the shatter of their landing, some old objects or whatever, and the place becomes this totally like freaky zone where all kinds of crazy things happen.
That's basically it.
It's not a very long book. It's called Roadside Picnic, and I believe that's the origin story that is inspired some of these movies you're talking about. And then there's a Russian science fiction film that was made based off the book, but it's very abstracted. It's almost not even recognizable from the book. But one of the big Russian filmmakers, it was what's the name of that movie?
Is it Tarkovsky?
Yeah. He made a movie of Roadside Picnic in about 1980 something or other. The movie has some notoriety because some of the main people associated with it, unfortunately, a couple of the actors, and I believe the director himself, all died of some cancer that they were exposed to because they were filming, ironically or whatever, in this kind of toxic, even though it's out in the nature, it's a toxic area.
Fucking A. Jesus.
It's so ironic, of course, because the whole premise of the original novel is that the aliens have kind of created these toxic no-go zones. Now I got to go find my copy of that book.
Thank you for that recommendation. The drummer of my band Interpol is also a massive fan, and it's one of the things that we've bonded over the years. Both, pretty much all your projects. And he actually did a session with Eric Drew Feldman years ago before Sam and I were even working together. But he wanted to know how you came into contact with the drummer and with Lyle Workman, these kind of like extremely technically proficient, badass motherfuckers that play on Teenage of the Year. And I know Lyle is on Cult of Ray because he did some of my favorite work on the song Adventure in the Resolution, which I love that song. But could you tell me how it came to work with these two kind of like professional, like titans of fucking virtuoso play?
Yeah, sure. Well, to start off with Nick, the drummer, he went to high school with Eric Feldman and other guy called Morris Tepper, guitarist. And another guy called Rob Loffer, and they're all from the San Fernando Valley. A couple of them ended up playing with Captain Beefheart. They all kind of grew up together. But Nick, the drummer, he has been a long time session musician, held in very, very high regard. Eric called him or suggested him because they must have known each other in high school. I think that's where we got Nick involved. Lyle, there's this producer that I work with, this guy called John Tiven, and he kind of does a lot of like blues music and stuff like that. But and he works with a lot of older artists, and he's got a Rolodex. You know what I mean? He's just got everybody's number. He'll ask anybody to do the session. It doesn't matter how famous they are. And you know what? Every once in a while, people say yes to him. And so every time I do a session with this guy, John, he always has like these like amazing people there that you can't believe are there, you know? And anyway, he asked me one of the first times I worked with him, he just said, come do this tribute record of this guy, Otis Blackwell, who's a songwriter. The song I did was Handyman, right? Which is made famous in North America by James Taylor. But the version that I was introduced to was Del Shannon. And that's how I became a really huge Del Shannon fan. But anyway, they said, meet me in San Francisco area at the studio. There's going to be a Otis Blackwell session, and you're going to sing Handyman or whatever, and there'll be some shit hot band there or whatever. And there's other artists are doing this tribute record as well. So I said, okay, fine. And I don't even remember who even played on my track. Maybe Lyle played on the track, but he was also there with somebody else. So someone associated with like, who's that guy? Huey Lewis in the News. It was like people from Huey Lewis in the News somehow were involved there too. Anyway, there was this very tall, redheaded guy named Lyle, and he said, "Hey, man, I heard your first solo record, Frank Black. I'm a big fan." And the main credential in his cap that he wanted to mention was that he had worked previously with Todd Rundgren, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm a guitar player, and you know, if you ever need someone, I'm available. I'm a big fan." And so when we were in LA, we suddenly found ourselves needing someone who could work quickly. And so we called up Lyle, and he flew down and he made the record with us. I guess, you know, in guitar parlance, I guess you could say he's a shredder, but that would be too simplistic.
A lot of people can play, but he just does crazy things like psychedelic shit.
Yeah, and he's very humble about it. He's really just having fun. And he doesn't mind emulating things. He does a lot of soundtrack work, so he doesn't mind like giving you something that sounds like something else if you want. You know, he's comfortable with changing styles. He has his own things that he's drawn to, but his palette is very broad. I don't even think we ever instructed him once about anything on the entire record. We just said, "Okay, we're gonna play now. Here's the song. Here's the root chords that we're going to play."
You can hear it. You can hear the joy. I think that's actually a big dimension of the record, is that it's really fun. It's like a really fun ride. And it's 22 songs, no skips. It's just banger after banger. Are you a big ping pong player?
No, not particularly, I suppose. Why do you ask?
The first song, are you referring to the video game, or are you referring to the
whatever happened to Pong? Sure. You know, looking at all of these musical ditties that had started to pile up, I finally started to write some lyrics. I remember that particular lyric came up right in the middle of like some forest fires that were happening in Calabasas. So we're up there at Calabasas Hills, and the fires were getting closer and closer. And there was this kind of like, we didn't know how much longer that particular session was going to last because it was getting too smoky, and the fire department was maybe going to shut down the roads to get to the studio, but it hadn't happened yet. So we kind of kept going and kind of pushing it to the last minute is what we did. Anyway, I remember that was the first vocal that we did for the record. It ended up being first on the record also, but that was the first one that we recorded. recorded.
It's fun. It's a great opener.
But yeah, it just tells the tale of playing a game as a child in a bar room with my brother, where our father was the bartender there. So there was this moment in about 1975, I guess, or somewhere around there, where things went from analog to digital in a certain kind of way. And so suddenly it hadn't made the jump yet to people's television sets at home yet or anything like that. At least in the world that I lived in, and we didn't have a lot of stuff when I was growing up, but we hadn't run into sort of like personal gaming things or gaming consoles or any of that kind of nonsense. That didn't exist.
Yeah.
So we went to arcades where they had games. It was still kind of the era of pinball machines and that sort of thing. And in the bars where our father worked, it was pool tables and, that kind of thing. And then one day there was this new game called Pong. And it was different. It was a TV screen. And there was this kind of representative dot. And there was a representative line. It was very minimalist, of course. And it was to represent tennis or ping pong, if you will.
So it's actually about the beginning of digital rather than the end of analog.
I don't know. It was just sort of like a moment in time. And we were just young enough that my brother and I, that we were young enough to absorb the moment, as it were, hanging out at this bar called Jack's Lounge. So we got very good at it. And we were just hanging out at the bar waiting for our father's shift to get over, right? So, we were little kids and probably the old timers, they would figure out a way to throw us a buck or two once in a while, and they would lose at a game or whatever. Maybe it was deliberate, maybe because we were good. I don't know. But, we would do small time gambling with them over the game.
Yeah, taking money from guys more used to the playing of cards is the lyric.
Yeah, exactly.
I wouldn't have necessarily guessed that would be an autobiographical song.
Yeah, totally true. The bar is still there, in fact, that same bar. I don't know if it was an important story to tell, but sometimes that's the one thing that's nice about a ditty is that you can say, well, I don't know if I have something important to say here, but I do have this one little thing I can tell you here, and we're not going to be here very long anyway. We're only going to be here for 1 minute and 24 seconds, and there's even going to be a guitar solo. So, we can just make the statement about whatever it is we're going to make, and we can draw whatever existential conclusions we're going to make later.
But there's so much fun happening in the music in that song and a lot of the other songs where it's like a punk prog thing, where it's just a lot more complex than a lot of music, but it's evoking just a sort of headbanging romp.
I think some of the shorter ditty kind of style of writing that I have done, and I did it a lot in the Pixies too, especially early Pixies. I think some of that comes from sort of not lack of confidence, but a little bit of sheepishness, a little bit of like, well, I have this musical idea. I don't know how great it is. I don't want to bore you with it for too long. Let's just do it real fast and then be done with it. We're not going to make it too big a deal out of it. And so I think that, and you can always kind of cite Buddy Holly or, I don't know, old punk records. You can always cite something like that. Well, it was good enough for the Damned or whatever. It's good enough for Buddy Holly, whatever, to come in at 1 minute and 45 seconds here. So fuck it. It's just like I was saying before about the Beatles. I've already been given license to do that,
Mm-hmm. It's difficult, I think, to talk to an artist about what their impact is in the world and have them speak candidly about it. But I hope that you feel recognized for the amount of contribution and influence that you had. Like I first became passionate about being a musician, or I made the decision that it would be my life path when Nirvana came out, and I was like 14, 15.
Right.
And then I discovered Pixies a bit later. And then I heard this song, Rock Music, that you did. And I felt like, oh my God, this is this song must have influenced Nirvana. And this is just one song in Pixies, enormous catalog. Do you remember the one I'm talking about? You remember how rock music goes that you wrote?
Sure, yeah.
I love that song, and it's like screamy.
Yeah, I think that it was kind of like a ditty that was on deck, and the producer, Gil, knew it was going to be something that I would sing aggressively, right? And even though he, as a producer, and I find this to be true of a lot of British producers, is there's some little part of their brain, there's some little part of their soul that is solely concerned with, I wonder if I can get this on BBC One or whatever it is, or Top of the Pops or whatever I can do to basically kind of be a cause celeb in the charts. They think about music, pop music, in those terms. I'm not saying they prioritize it, but they're smelling for it, right? They're kind of like anything that kind of smells like maybe it's kind of poppy and catchy, like we're going to run with that. So in tune, we're going to play it over and over. They really are looking for that. Having said that, and I appreciate that about them too. I'm not saying that disparagingly, but also because with the Pixies, we have this kind of more kind of loose, kind of ditty, sort of, I don't know, punky, kind of quickie, like,
that's an in and out song.
Kind of manic kind of side, unhinged, right? We can do something that sounds more unhinged, off the hook, whatever. And so Gil, being aware of that, he heard that ditty on deck, and he was really like, come on, Charles, when are you going to finish that? Come on, Charles, when are you going to sing on top of that? And I think I got really frustrated with him, and we had this bullhorn that I was messing around with, and I think I composed something it was a real lyric, but it was very minimalist. It didn't really mean that much.
But yeah, it's just an energy punch, that song. That song gets me really revved up. And I feel like, as I say, it's a template for a lot of stuff after that.
It starts to get into kind of a jazz area. I don't mean so much in terms of that musically, but in terms of like lyrically where you're going, and you're kind of like deconstructing the idea of a lead vocal a little bit. You're kind of, you're making it so that it's so minimalist and so blown out that it's really more of a sound than a sort of certainly not a poetic statement. We're not worried about any rhyme schemes here. There's sort of like we're doing away with the preciousness of language and the word, and it's really like we're bringing it down into this kind of grunting kind of primal area. It's very temper tantrum. It's a kind of an attempt at minimalism or something like that. I don't know if it's good, but
it's so good.
It does come together naturally as a performance. It's not too long. We have fun hitting the chords. It stops quickly on a dime. It's loud. It's somehow cathartic for the band to do it in a set, not necessarily every night.
I think it influenced some of my favorite Nirvana work, actually. But and I think as a singer, that's one of the great things about the voice and being in a rock band, and as you're saying, not feeling tethered to anything, or you've always felt licensed to explore whatever you want to do as a vocalist. And I think what you get to do as a singer is you have the melody and you have the word, but then there's everything that is said in just the emotion of how you're saying the word and how you're saying the melody. And so I think a lot of what you just said makes me think that perhaps a lot of how I approach doing vocals, or this insight I have, maybe is inspired by some of your work, which that idea of the temper tantrum, you're conveying a lot of angst with just the tonality of the voice. So it doesn't matter what the words are. It doesn't matter what the melody is, because there's this other dimension, which is just like the feeling. And I think that speaks to what I was mentioning earlier about atmospheres, that I think you create these, very great, powerful ones. So anyway, I hope, rather than asking you to answer the question of if you feel sort of recognized, I hope you continue to make great work. But it pains me, this idea that sometimes people don't get, their flowers, as they say, or like adequate flowers in their time. And I would just, from my one point of view, like to, really just say, I think you're fucking massive.
Well, thank you very much. I mean,
Yeah, man.
from my point of view, I mean, I'm very appreciative that people that have validated some of my work and said that they liked it or whatever, especially other musicians. But I never really have put. If you can make a record and have it sort of exist, have it be published, and if you can maybe have some sort of coinciding live performance that you do that sort of reflects some of what you do in those recordings, to do in front of an audience in the form of a concert. If you can do that, even at the smallest level, you know what I mean, in a cafe or whatever, and you can make records that are available that people can hear, and especially if you can do it to the degree that that's how you pay your bills. Like, that's how you make your way, you know what I mean, through the world. And you don't have to do the warehouse job or the bartending job or whatever it is. If I can actually just do the music thing, like, I'm good. I would love to have a gazillion dollars. Sure. I would love to have plenty of money. But like, if I have enough money to kind of just do the musician thing, I'm good. I'm never gonna disparage that. And so I never do, and it's worked out pretty good. I mean, occasionally I'm a little bit like, I'm tired, I'm cranky, I'm old. What am I doing out here? I'm in fucking Serbia and I don't feel good, and I'm far away from home, and I'm not having a good time. Occasionally, you got moments they're just like, this sucks. No one realizes how hard it is. But hey, let's face it, most of the time, even when it's kind of hard, it's pretty great. Just the people watching alone is fucking great.
Absolutely.
What have I got to complain about,
I hear that. But I would love to come to see these shows you're doing for Teenager of the Year. But if I don't get to see it, I hope you have a lot of fun, and I hope it's a great experience for you. And I'm sure the audiences are going to be fucking amazed.
Thank you for the help today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for talking to me.
Yeah.
Thanks, man.
Take care.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Thanks for listening to the Talkhouse podcast, and thanks to Frank Black and Paul Banks for chatting. If you liked what you heard, please follow Talkhouse on your favorite podcasting platform and check out all the great shows on the Talkhouse Podcast Network. This episode was produced by Myron Kaplan, and the Talkhouse theme is composed and performed by The Range. See you next time.